My sister wanted to sell the house that our parents left to me. She was taking furniture out of the house and selling it until I told her. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm 34, and life has been anything but predictable lately. To cut to the chase, my parents passed away unexpectedly about 8 months ago. They were incredible people. For the last few years of their lives, I had the privilege and the challenge of taking care of them. It wasn't easy, but I don't regret a second of it. They deserved to spend their final years in comfort and surrounded by love. Their passing hit me harder than I ever imagined. My sister, Vanessa, and I processed the loss differently. Vanessa is 4 years younger than me, and we've always been, let's say, on opposite ends of the spectrum. Where I'm more grounded and methodical, she's spontaneous and emotional. Growing up, she was always the adventurous one, while I played it safe. But when the will was read, everything changed. I didn't even know the full extent of my parents' estate until that day. Vanessa and I sat together in the lawyer's office, a place that smelled like old leather and varnished wood. My stomach churned as he unfolded the documents and started reading the will. To our beloved son, Alex, who has taken care of us and this home with unmatched dedication, we leave the family estate. The family estate. That wasn't just a house. It was the house. A sprawling 19th century Victorian property with its stained glass windows, creaking wooden floors, and history carved into every corner. It was the home we grew up in. Vanessa's face went pale, then red. She stayed quiet while the lawyer continued. She was left a significant sum of money and some other assets, but the house? That was mine. And in that moment, I could feel the rift between us widening. At first, Vanessa pretended to be fine with the arrangement. It makes sense, she said, plastering on a smile. You took care of them. It's only fair. But as the weeks passed, that facade crumbled. One day, she showed up at the house unannounced. We need to talk, she said, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. She walked through the front door as if she still owned the place, her heels echoing in the hallway. I can't believe they left you the house, she started. I mean, I'm happy for you, but don't you think we should, I don't know, sell it and split the profit? It's not like you need all this space. I stood my ground. Vanessa, this isn't just a house. It's our home. I couldn't sell it. I'd never forgive myself. Her laugh was bitter. You always were the golden child, weren't you? Mom and Dad's little favorite. That stung. I tried to explain that it wasn't about favoritism, but she wasn't hearing it. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. After Vanessa's outburst, I started to feel uneasy in the house. At first, I chalked it up to grief, but then, strange things started happening. I'd find lights on in rooms I hadn't entered. Doors would creak open on their own. I told myself it was just an old house settling, but the unease grew. One night, while going through some of my parents' old belongings, I found something that made my heart race. A locked box hidden under a loose floorboard in their bedroom. The key was nowhere to be found, but the box was small enough to break open. Inside, I found a collection of old letters, some dating back decades. What caught my attention was a particular letter addressed to Vanessa. It was written by our father, but never sent. The contents made my blood run cold. Vanessa, my dear daughter, it began. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, but I've never found the right words. The truth is, I stopped reading, my hands trembling. The letter revealed something I couldn't have imagined. Vanessa wasn't my parents' biological child. She had been adopted as an infant. My parents never told her, and I could only guess why. Maybe they wanted to spare her the pain. Maybe they thought it didn't matter. But now, with the house and everything else dividing us, I wondered if this secret would make things better, or destroy what little was left of our relationship. I wrestled with whether to tell her. In the end, I decided she had a right to know. When I called her over, she arrived with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. We sat in the living room, the air thick with tension. Vanessa, I started, there's something I found while going through Dad's things. Something you need to know. I handed her the letter. As she read, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger. You're lying, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not, I replied. I didn't want to hurt you. But you deserve to know. She stood up abruptly. This is why they gave you the house, isn't it? Because I'm not really their child? No, I protested. They loved you, Vanessa. This house, this inheritance, has nothing to do with that. But she wasn't listening. She stormed out again, slamming the door even harder than the last time. The days after that were a blur. Vanessa wouldn't return my calls or texts. I started hearing from mutual friends that she was telling people I had manipulated our parents into leaving me the house. Some even hinted that she was planning to contest the will. Then, one night, I came home to find the front door wide open. My heart sank. Inside, the place was a mess. Drawers had been pulled out, papers scattered everywhere. It didn't take long to figure out who was responsible. Vanessa. I found her upstairs in our parents' bedroom, frantically searching through their belongings. What the hell are you doing? I shouted. She turned to me, her eyes wild. Looking for proof, she spat. Proof that you don't deserve this house. In the chaos of that confrontation, Vanessa accidentally uncovered something neither of us expected. A second will, hidden in the lining of an old suitcase. It was dated a year before the one we had seen, and its contents changed everything. According to this will, the house was supposed to go to both of us. Equal ownership. We stared at each other, the weight of the discovery sinking in. I knew it, Vanessa said, her voice trembling. They never meant for you to have it all. I didn't know what to say. The document was real, but it was also outdated. Did it matter? Was it fair? And how would we move forward from here? I thought I'd seen the worst of Vanessa's reactions to the inheritance fiasco, but I was wrong. A few months after our confrontation about the house and the discovery of the second will, she showed up at my doorstep again. This time, though, her demeanor was different. Instead of fiery anger, she was subdued, almost defeated. Alex, she started, her voice trembling. I need your help. I hesitated. My relationship with Vanessa was still fractured. Her accusations had hurt, and I wasn't eager to open old wounds. But she looked genuinely distressed. What's going on? I asked cautiously. She sighed deeply. I'm in a bit of a financial bind, she admitted. I made some poor choices, and I need a place to stay. Just for a little while. Until I get back on my feet. I could guess what those poor choices were. Vanessa had always lived beyond her means. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, flashy cars. She was the queen of appearances, but now it seemed the facade was crumbling. I didn't want to let her move in. The house was my sanctuary, the last piece of stability I had left after our parents' deaths. But she was my sister. I couldn't say no outright. All right, I said finally. You can stay, but just for a few months. And we'll need to set some ground rules. She nodded quickly, a little too eagerly. Of course, of course. Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate it. Vanessa moved in the following week. At first, things were relatively calm. She kept to herself, unpacked her things in one of the upstairs bedrooms, and seemed genuinely grateful for the help. I started to think maybe this arrangement wouldn't be so bad. But that optimism didn't last long. It started small. One day, I came home from work to find the living room rearranged. Vanessa had moved the furniture around without asking me. I thought this layout was more inviting, she said casually when I confronted her. Vanessa, this is my house, I reminded her. You can't just change things without talking to me first. She rolled her eyes. Relax, Alex. It's just furniture. I let it slide, thinking it wasn't worth the argument. But then the changes escalated. A few days later, I noticed new decorations popping up around the house. Vases, paintings, throw pillows that definitely weren't mine. I checked my bank account and saw a charge for over $10,000 from a home decor store. What the hell, Vanessa? I demanded, holding up my phone. Did you use my card for this? She looked genuinely confused. Oh, that? I thought it was on the joint account Mom and Dad used to have. I didn't realize it came from your account. I'll pay you back. I didn't believe her for a second. She didn't even have a job at that point. But I couldn't exactly repossess the decor she'd already scattered around the house. I warned her to be more careful, but she just brushed me off. Things spiraled from there. Vanessa started inviting friends over for small gatherings. which quickly turned into loud parties that went on until the early hours of the morning. Strangers were traipsing through the house, spilling drinks on the carpets, and leaving cigarette butts on the porch. When I confronted her, she just laughed it off. "Alex, you're such a buzzkill," she said, rolling her eyes. "You should loosen up. It's just a little fun." I tried to stand firm. "This isn't a party house, Vanessa. I didn't agree to this." She smirked. "Well, maybe you should. This place could use some life." It wasn't just the parties. One day, I came home and found the locks had been changed. I stood on the porch, fumbling with my key, confused and increasingly frustrated. Finally, Vanessa opened the door, looking annoyed. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," she said. "I had the locks changed. The old ones were so outdated." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Vanessa, you changed the locks without telling me? This is my house." She shrugged. "Relax. I made copies of the keys for you. Here." She handed me a new set, as if that made it okay. At this point, I started to wonder if I'd made a huge mistake letting her move in. But the breaking point came a few weeks later. I came home to find my parents' old study, one of the few rooms I'd kept untouched as a way to remember them, completely cleared out. The bookshelves were empty, the desk was gone, and in its place was a massive flat-screen TV and a plush sectional sofa. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "Oh, I thought we could turn this room into a home theater," Vanessa said, completely unfazed. The study was so depressing. "Don't you think this is a better use of the space?" I couldn't take it anymore. "Vanessa, you've crossed the line. You're treating this house like it's yours, and it's not. You can't just erase Mom and Dad's memory like this." Her face hardened. "Maybe I wouldn't have to if they'd treated me like a real part of the family." There it was. The bitterness that had been simmering since she found out she was adopted. I knew this wasn't just about the house anymore. Vanessa was lashing out, trying to claim ownership over something she felt she'd been denied. But her actions were destroying the last shred of goodwill I had left for her. I knew I had to do something before she completely took over. The next morning, I called a locksmith to change the locks back. When Vanessa found out, she was furious. "You're kicking me out?" she demanded. "No," I said firmly, "but this is my house, and you're going to respect that. If you can't, then yes, you'll have to leave." She stormed off, slamming doors and muttering under her breath. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, but I underestimated just how far Vanessa was willing to go. One evening, while I was out running errands, I got a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Larson. "Alex, there's a moving truck outside your house," she said, sounding concerned. "It looks like they're taking things out." My heart sank. I rushed home to find Vanessa directing movers to load my furniture into the truck. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. "Oh, calm down," she said. "I'm just selling some of the old stuff. You'll thank me later." I was beyond furious. "Vanessa, this is the last straw. You're out. Pack your things and get out of my house." She laughed, clearly not taking me seriously. "You can't kick me out. I'm family." But I'd had enough. I called the police to report the attempted theft and made it clear that Vanessa was no longer welcome in my home. She tried to play the victim, crying and accusing me of being heartless, but I didn't care anymore. I thought things would finally calm down after Vanessa left, but I should have known better. The chaos she caused while living here was nothing compared to the storm that came after. A couple of weeks passed in relative peace. I started cleaning up the mess she left behind, both physically and emotionally. The house felt like mine again, though there were still reminders of Vanessa's intrusion. Her loud parties, the damaged furniture, and, worst of all, the lingering sense of betrayal. Just as I was beginning to find some semblance of normalcy, Vanessa called. "I've been thinking," she said, her tone saccharine sweet. "Maybe I overreacted. Why don't we come to an agreement?" I was immediately suspicious. "What kind of agreement?" "Let me move back in," she said matter-of-factly. "I'll be more respectful this time, I promise. Or, better yet, you could just transfer the house into both our names. That way, we can avoid any misunderstandings." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Vanessa, are you serious? After everything that's happened, you think I'd just hand over half the house?" She huffed, her tone turning icy. It's not about what you'd hand over. It's about what I deserve. This house is just as much mine as it is yours. I tried to stay calm, but the frustration boiled over. No, Vanessa, it's not. Mom and Dad left it to me. It's in the will. You got your share, remember? Her laugh was sharp, almost cruel. Oh, please. That money barely covered my debts. And if you think I'm just going to walk away while you sit in our family home, you're delusional. That's when I decided to put my foot down. All right, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Here's the deal. You can move back in, but you'll pay $3,000 a month in rent. Otherwise, you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Her reaction was immediate. Rent? Are you kidding me? I'm not paying to live in my own house. It's not your house, Vanessa. And if you're not willing to contribute, then you're not living here. She hung up on me. I thought that was the end of it, her dramatic way of rejecting the offer. But, as usual, Vanessa had other plans. About a week later, I received a thick envelope in the mail. Inside was a summons. Vanessa was suing me. She was claiming she had a right to half of the estate, despite the clear terms of the will. My stomach dropped as I read the papers, disbelief giving way to anger. She was really going through with this. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Rachel. Rachel was a no-nonsense type with a sharp mind and a reputation for being relentless in court. She had helped me handle the legalities of the inheritance after my parents passed, so she was already familiar with the case. Alex, this is absurd, she said after I explained the situation. The will is airtight. Vanessa doesn't have a leg to stand on. Then why is she doing this? I asked, pacing the living room. She has to know she's going to lose. Rachel sighed. Sometimes it's not about winning. She might just want to make your life difficult. Or she's hoping you'll settle to avoid the hassle. Settle? No way. She's not getting a dime more from me. Good, Rachel said firmly. We'll fight this. But be prepared. This kind of case can get messy. Messy was an understatement. The lawsuit brought out sides of Vanessa I didn't even know existed. She began telling anyone who would listen that I had manipulated our parents into leaving me the house. She painted herself as the victim, the poor little sister cast aside by her greedy brother. To make matters worse, she hired a lawyer of her own, James Whitaker, a slick, overconfident type who seemed more interested in theatrics than facts. The first time we met in mediation, he strutted into the room as if he'd already won. Mr. Carter, he said, flashing me a smarmy smile. I think we can all agree this is just a misunderstanding. Vanessa only wants what's fair. Fair? I shot back. The will was perfectly clear. This house is mine. James's smile didn't waver. Wills can be contested, especially when undue influence is involved. I clenched my fists under the table. There was no undue influence. I took care of our parents for years. Vanessa barely visited. Vanessa, sitting across from me, let out a dramatic sigh. I had my reasons, she said, her voice trembling. You don't know what it was like for me, Alex. Always feeling like I wasn't good enough. Like I didn't belong. That has nothing to do with the will. I snapped. Mom and Dad loved you, Vanessa. This lawsuit is just you being vindictive. The mediation went nowhere. Vanessa refused to drop the case, and I refused to settle. It became clear we were heading for a courtroom battle. As the weeks dragged on, Vanessa escalated her campaign against me. She started showing up at the house unannounced, banging on the door and demanding to be let in. Once, she brought a reporter from a local tabloid, hoping to publicly shame me into giving her what she wanted. I refused to engage, but the constant harassment wore me down. Things took an even darker turn when I discovered that Vanessa had been talking to some of our extended family, spinning her version of events. A few cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly started sending me angry messages, accusing me of being selfish and heartless. It was infuriating, but also heartbreaking. Vanessa was turning people against me, people who didn't even know the full story. The trial date loomed closer, and the stress was taking its toll. I barely slept, constantly replaying arguments in my head. Rachel did her best to keep me focused. She gathered every piece of evidence we had to support my case. The will, testimony from the lawyer who drafted it, even letters from my parents thanking me for taking care of them. But the uncertainty was exhausting. No matter how strong our case was, there was always a chance things could go wrong. The day of the trial arrived, and I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. Vanessa sat at her table, looking composed and confident, while I felt like my insides were tied in knots. James opened with a dramatic speech about family bonds and broken promises, painting me as a villain who had taken advantage of our parents' trust. But Rachel was ready. She tore apart their arguments with cold, hard facts. She presented the will, explained its legitimacy, and highlighted Vanessa's financial irresponsibility as a motive for the lawsuit. By the time she was done, James's theatrics looked flimsy in comparison. When Vanessa took the stand, she broke down in tears, claiming she had been blindsided by the will. "I loved my parents," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know why they would do this to me." It was hard to watch, but Rachel didn't hold back during cross-examination. She pointed out the generous sum Vanessa had already received, questioned her claims of estrangement, and highlighted her behavior since the will was read. Vanessa's credibility crumbled under the pressure. After what felt like an eternity, the judge ruled in my favor. The will stood as written, and Vanessa's claim was dismissed. Relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. Winning the case didn't fix the damage Vanessa had done to our relationship or to my peace of mind. As I left the courtroom, Vanessa glared at me, her eyes filled with resentment. "This isn't over," she hissed. I didn't respond. I'd spent enough time and energy fighting her battles. All I wanted now was to move on and protect the life I'd worked so hard to rebuild. I knew letting Vanessa back into my life would be a mistake, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to go to disrupt everything I had built. After the failed negotiation over rent, her lawsuit, and her refusal to respect boundaries, I realized I had no choice. I had to take formal legal action to evict her. I tried to keep things civil, but Vanessa's behavior left me no alternative. I hired a new lawyer for this round, Mark Daniels. Mark came highly recommended as a specialist in property disputes. He was in his late 40s, with a calm demeanor that made me feel like I was in good hands. "Don't worry, Alex," he assured me during our first meeting. "Cases like this are clear-cut when you have the documentation to back it up." Thankfully, I did. Mark started by gathering everything we needed to support my case: the will, property deeds, and a detailed record of all the repairs and renovations I'd done on the house since inheriting it. Over the years, I'd spent more than $50,000 maintaining the place. New plumbing, electrical rewiring, roof repairs, and even restoring some of the antique woodwork my parents had cherished. Every receipt and invoice went into a neat file that Mark was confident would bolster our case. While Mark worked on the legal side, I tried to keep my focus on day-to-day life. But Vanessa wasn't about to make that easy. She launched a full-blown social media campaign, painting herself as the victim of a cruel, heartless brother who was trying to throw her out on the street. It started with a post on her Facebook page. "My brother, Alex, is trying to evict me from our family home," she wrote, alongside a photo of herself looking tearful in front of the house. "This house was my childhood too, but he wants it all to himself. I have nowhere else to go. Please share and help me fight this injustice." The post quickly went viral, shared by hundreds of people who didn't know the full story. Comments poured in, calling me everything from selfish to abusive. "How could you do this to your sister?" one person wrote. "Family is supposed to come first." Another chimed in, "This guy doesn't deserve that house if he's treating his sister like this. Shame on him." At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that anyone who knew me, really knew me, would see through Vanessa's lies. But the comments kept coming, and soon I started getting harassing messages in my own inbox. People I'd never met were calling me a monster, a thief, and worse. It was exhausting, but I refused to let Vanessa's smear campaign distract me from the task at hand. I wasn't completely alone in this fight, though. My best friend, Kevin, had been by my side through everything. Kevin and I had known each other since college, and he was the kind of friend who would drop everything to help when things got tough. "You need to stop letting her walk all over you," he said one night over beers. "This is your house, Alex. You've done everything right. Don't let her guilt you into thinking otherwise." Kevin wasn't just talk, either. When he saw how much stress I was under, he rallied a group of our mutual friends to help. They came over on weekends to help me fix up parts of the house Vanessa had damaged. Emily, a mutual friend with a knack for design, even helped me rehang some of the original family portraits that Vanessa had unceremoniously removed during her stint as Queen of the Manor. Despite their support, Vanessa's online antics kept escalating. She started posting videos where she walked through the house, pointing out features and claiming, "This was my mother's favorite room, and now my brother is kicking me out of it." In one particularly infuriating clip, she stood in the living room and said, "I just don't understand how someone who claims to care about family can do something so cruel." What made it worse was that some of our extended family bought into her narrative. Cousins who hadn't been in touch in years suddenly resurfaced, sending me messages about how I was betraying our parents' legacy. One even called to yell at me, accusing me of being just as bad as those people who evict little old ladies. It was surreal. Meanwhile, Mark was making steady progress on the legal front. He filed for formal eviction, presenting all the necessary evidence to show that Vanessa had no legal claim to the house. "This is open and shut," he told me during one of our strategy meetings. "The will is clear. You're the rightful owner, and Vanessa has overstayed her welcome. The court will see that." But Vanessa wasn't done playing games. During a preliminary hearing, her lawyer, James Whitaker, the same smug attorney from her earlier lawsuit, tried to argue that Vanessa had a moral right to the house, even if the legal documents said otherwise. "This house represents a shared family history," James said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "My client simply wants what is fair." Mark was having none of it. "Fairness is following the will, which clearly leaves the house to my client," he shot back. "Ms. Carter has already received her share of the inheritance and has no legal right to this property." The judge seemed unimpressed by James's theatrics, but Vanessa wasn't about to back down. She started making life even more difficult for me, showing up at the house unannounced and refusing to leave. One night, she brought a group of her friends and staged what can only be described as a protest on the front lawn. They held signs reading, "Justice for Vanessa," and chanted slogans about family unity. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Vanessa and her friends had scattered. It felt like a never-ending nightmare. No matter how much progress we made in court, Vanessa found new ways to drag things out and make my life miserable. One of the most surreal moments came when I discovered that Vanessa had started a GoFundMe campaign titled, "Help Me Save My Family Home." The page was filled with tearful anecdotes about her childhood, complete with photos of her and me as kids. She conveniently left out the part where she had already received her share of the inheritance. The campaign raised thousands of dollars, mostly from strangers who had no idea they were being duped. Eventually, the eviction case made its way to court. Mark presented our evidence meticulously: the will, the property deed, and a detailed accounting of all the money I'd spent on repairs and upkeep. He even called on a contractor to testify about the renovations I'd done, proving that I had invested significantly in maintaining the property. Vanessa, predictably, played the victim on the stand. She cried about how she felt abandoned by our parents and claimed that the house was her only connection to them. But when Mark cross-examined her, he exposed the inconsistencies in her story. "Ms. Carter," he said, "isn't it true that you received a substantial monetary inheritance from your parents?" Vanessa squirmed. "Yes, but..." "And isn't it also true that you've been living rent-free in this house for months, against the wishes of the legal owner?" She had no good answer. By the time the trial ended, it was clear that the court wasn't buying her sob story. The judge ruled in my favor, granting the eviction and ordering Vanessa to vacate the property within 30 days. It was a hard-fought victory, but it came at a cost. The house felt different now, tainted by all the drama and betrayal. Still, I was determined to move forward. With Vanessa finally out of the picture, I could start rebuilding my life and my home on my own terms. The relief I felt when the court ruled in my favor was overwhelming. For months, I had been living in a nightmare of lawsuits, harassment, and public humiliation. But now, the decision was final. Vanessa had 60 days to move out of the house. It wasn't as immediate as I'd hoped, but it was a definitive end. Or so I thought. Vanessa didn't take the ruling well. She sat in the courtroom, stone-faced, as the judge announced the decision. When we left, I half expected her to unleash one of her dramatic tirades, but she didn't say a word. Instead, she brushed past me and her lawyer, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. That silence was almost worse than an outburst. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like something was brewing. The first few weeks after the ruling were eerily calm. Vanessa didn't contact me, and there were no surprise visits or protests on the lawn. I started to believe that maybe she was finally accepting reality. I even allowed myself to relax a little, thinking the worst was behind me. But Vanessa wasn't done. One evening, I came home to find a moving truck parked outside the house. Vanessa and a group of friends were loading boxes into the back. I stood in the driveway, watching them. It was a strange mix of emotions. Relief that she was finally leaving and unease at how smoothly it seemed to be going. Vanessa spotted me and gave a sarcastic little wave, her face twisted into a smug grin. "Don't worry, Alex," she called out. "I'll be out of your precious house soon enough." Her tone made my skin crawl, but I didn't engage. The last thing I wanted was another argument. Instead, I went inside and tried to focus on the fact that, in just a few more weeks, the house would be mine again, free of Vanessa's chaos. I should have known better. The night before her move-out deadline, I got a frantic call from Kevin. "Alex, you need to get home. Now." "What's going on?" I asked, alarmed by the urgency in his voice. "Just get here," he said. "It's bad." I drove home as fast as I could, my heart pounding the entire way. When I pulled into the driveway, I was greeted by the sight of my beautiful house, a house that had stood for generations in my family, completely vandalized. The once pristine white exterior was covered in graffiti. Words like traitor and thief were spray-painted across the walls in bold, angry letters. I stepped inside, and my stomach dropped. The interior was unrecognizable. Furniture was smashed to pieces. My parents' antique dining table, a cherished family heirloom, was nothing more than a pile of splintered wood. The walls were covered in more graffiti, crude messages that attacked me personally. "Family doesn't do this" was scrawled across the living room wall in bright red paint. Broken glass crunched under my feet as I walked through the house, taking in the destruction. The kitchen was even worse. Cabinets had been ripped off their hinges, and the countertops were scratched and gouged. The appliances, which I had spent thousands of dollars repairing, were destroyed. Wires cut, doors dented, and in some cases, smashed beyond recognition. I made my way upstairs, dreading what I would find. Vanessa had turned the bedrooms into scenes of pure chaos. My parents' old room, which I had kept intact as a way to remember them, was a disaster. The bed frame was broken, the mattress slashed open, and their old wardrobe had been tipped over and smashed. She had even gone through their belongings, scattering photos, letters, and keepsakes all over the floor. My own room wasn't spared. My clothes were shredded, my books torn apart, and my desk had been completely upended. A can of paint had been dumped over the carpet, leaving a sticky, colorful mess. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a calculated act of revenge. Vanessa hadn't just wanted to destroy the house. She wanted to hurt me. Kevin arrived a few minutes later, along with Emily and a couple of our other friends. They walked through the house in stunned silence, shaking their heads at the devastation. "This is insane," Kevin muttered, picking up a broken photo frame. "She's completely lost it." Emily put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "We'll help you clean up," she said softly. "Whatever it takes, we'll fix this." I nodded numbly, but I wasn't sure if the damage could be fixed. I felt like a failure, not just because the house was in ruins, but because I had allowed things to get this far. I had trusted Vanessa, given her chance after chance, and this was how she repaid me. The next morning, I called Mark to explain what had happened. He was furious on my behalf. "This is a clear case of property damage," he said. "We're going to press charges. She's not getting away with this." Filing the police report was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. The officers who came to the house were sympathetic, but clearly shocked by the extent of the damage. They took photos of everything, documenting the destruction in painstaking detail. When I showed them the graffiti outside, one of them whistled under his breath. Whoever did this really wanted to send a message, he said. I gave them Vanessa's name without hesitation. I was done protecting her. She had crossed every line imaginable, and it was time for her to face the consequences. The legal process was slow, as always, but this time I felt like I had the upper hand. The evidence was overwhelming, and Vanessa couldn't deny what she had done. She tried to spin it, of course, claiming that she was pushed to her limit and that her actions were a cry for help, but even her lawyer seemed tired of her antics by this point. In the end, the court ordered Vanessa to pay restitution for the damage she caused, over $20,000 worth. Of course, I knew I'd probably never see that money. Vanessa didn't have the means to pay it back, and I wasn't holding my breath waiting for her to make good on the judgment. Still, there was a small sense of justice in seeing her held accountable, even if it wasn't enough to undo the damage. With the help of my friends, I started the long process of restoring the house. It was slow and expensive, but piece by piece, we began to rebuild. Kevin organized a fundraiser among our close-knit group, and Emily used her design skills to help me plan out repairs. It wasn't the same as before, but it was a start. Vanessa, meanwhile, faded from my life. After the court ruling, she stopped contacting me altogether. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved out of state, likely to avoid the fallout from her actions. Part of me was relieved to have her gone, but another part of me couldn't help but mourn the relationship we'd lost. No matter what she had done, she was still my sister. As I stood in the newly repaired living room months later, looking at the fresh paint and carefully restored furniture, I realized something important. The house wasn't just a building, it was a testament to resilience. My parents had built this home with love, and no amount of destruction could take that away. Vanessa had tried to tear it apart, but in the end, she only reminded me of how much this place meant to me. It wasn't just my inheritance, it was my legacy, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The day Vanessa finally left felt like the end of a war. She didn't go quietly, of course. Even as she packed up her belongings and shuffled out of the house, she made sure to mutter bitter remarks loud enough for me to hear. "Enjoy your precious house, Alex. It's all you've got left," she sneered as she slammed the door behind her. I stood in the entryway, watching through the window as the moving truck pulled away. It was over, at least. I hoped it was. The first thing I did was change the locks. It was symbolic as much as it was practical. I couldn't risk Vanessa pulling another stunt like the one she'd pulled before, but more than that, I needed to reclaim the house as mine. I hired a locksmith, and as I stood on the porch holding the new set of keys, I felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. The house was mine, yes, but it was also a reminder of everything I'd lost. My parents, my peace, and any semblance of a relationship with my sister. Lauren, my partner, was there to help me pick up the pieces. Lauren and I had been together for a few years by then. She was my rock through all the chaos, always knowing what to say to keep me grounded. While I dealt with Vanessa's endless drama, Lauren kept reminding me that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. "You're stronger than this," she'd say. "This house doesn't define you." After Vanessa left, Lauren moved in temporarily to help me restore the house. We spent countless weekends sanding down the floors, repainting the walls, and repairing the damage Vanessa had left behind. Some of it was fixable. New furniture replaced the broken pieces, fresh paint covered the graffiti, but other things were gone forever. My parents' antique dining table, the wardrobe in their bedroom, the family photos Vanessa had destroyed, those were irreplaceable. Despite our best efforts, the house didn't feel the same. Everywhere I looked, I saw memories, some good, but many tainted by the battles with Vanessa. It became harder and harder to walk through the halls without feeling weighed down by the past. One evening, as Lauren and I sat in the newly refurbished living room, she said something that stuck with me. "Alex, have you ever thought about selling the house?" I looked at her, surprised. "Selling it? I don't know. This house has been in my family for generations. It feels wrong to let it go." Lauren reached for my hand. "I understand that. But you've poured so much of yourself into fixing this place, and it still doesn't feel like home to you. Maybe it's time to start fresh." I thought about her words for days. She was right. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of grief and conflict. After weeks of soul-searching, I made the decision to put the house on the market. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the right thing to do. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Denise, was optimistic about the sale. "This property is a gem," she said during our first meeting. "The history, the architecture, the renovations you've done. It's going to attract a lot of interest." She was right. Within weeks, offers started pouring in. The final bid came in at just over $1 million, a number that still felt surreal to me. With the sale finalized, Lauren and I began looking for a new place to call home. We found a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, far enough from the old estate to feel like a fresh start. It had everything we needed: a big backyard for summer barbecues, a cozy fireplace, and plenty of room to grow. The day we moved into our new house was bittersweet. As the moving truck pulled up, I couldn't help but think about my parents and how proud they'd be of the life Lauren and I were building. I knew they'd understand why I had to let go of the estate. It wasn't about abandoning the past, but about freeing myself from it. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life took a very different turn. After losing the court case and being forced to move out, her financial troubles only got worse. She declared bankruptcy within months, losing her car and eventually her job. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances, though I never reached out to her directly. Part of me felt guilty, wondering if I could have done more to help her before things spiraled so far out of control. But the other part of me knew that I had done everything I could. Vanessa's choices were her own. One afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I was surprised to hear Vanessa's voice on the other end. "Alex," she said hesitantly. "It's me." I didn't know what to say. After everything we'd been through, hearing her voice again felt like reopening an old wound. "What do you want, Vanessa?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. There was a long pause. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said finally, "for everything." Her words caught me off guard. For a moment, I almost considered forgiving her, but then I remembered the destruction she had caused, not just to the house, but to our relationship. "Vanessa," I said carefully, "I think it's best if we go our separate ways." She didn't argue. "I understand," she said quietly. "Take care, Alex." That was the last time I ever spoke to her. In the months that followed, I heard through the grapevine that Vanessa had moved to a small town. She traded in her glamorous lifestyle for something simpler, working odd jobs and living in a modest apartment. I didn't know if she was happy, but I hoped she had finally found some peace. As for me, I had no desire to reopen that chapter of my life. Lauren and I settled into our new home, building a life free of drama and conflict. We filled the house with laughter, love, and memories that were entirely our own. On quiet evenings, we'd sit on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset and talking about our plans for the future.